Democratic Senator John Walsh will not be a senator in a year. He dropped out of his race for re-election just weeks after a New York Times report accused him of plagiarizing a research paper he wrote while studying at the U.S. Army War College. The Times came out with an exhaustive look on how the senator's paper either incorrectly or failed to attribute material used. One page was lifted from a Harvard paper, and more passages came from work from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And the senator, an Iraq War veteran, recently backed away from his initial claim that post-combat stress may have been a factor. Here now from Washington, we've got the editor-in-chief of Roll Call, Christina Bellantoni. Thank you so much. We've got Roll Call had its top 10 most vulnerable senators up for re-election, but number one with a bullet is no more. Go through the list.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know that Arkansas Senator Mark Pryor is all that happy about now claiming that top spot.
So Casey Kasem would say he's the new number one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Pryor number one.
Exactly. So John Walsh was always in a precarious spot because he was appointed to fill this seat when Max Baucus became ambassador to China. And this is a more Republican state. You have a member of Congress in Steve Daines, who represents the at-large seat, who's running against him. So the Republicans liked their chances here in, as you've been talking about, a pretty favorable year for them anyway. They have the candidates that they like. But when this all came out, you know, and credit to the New York Times, I mean, this was a very big deal. And Roll Call had actually noticed, our partners at the CQ members team had noticed that there were some discrepancies actually on his education as well. And that's something that we had put out there right when he was appointed. So he eventually just says, I'm not actually going to run for the seat. So Democrats have maybe a fighting chance if they get a candidate in there that they like. This was right at the end of the deadline.
Right.
So now you've got the rest of the top 10. We're going to, bump that up. We'll have the person who would have been number 11 and number 10. Probably that's going to be Senator Mark Warner in Virginia. Again, that's a pretty long shot, but you never know. You
never know. Let's put that list back up again, John Hyland. Do you see anything on the list that you've got Pryor at number one now, going to be number one, Mary Landrieu, Kay Hagan, Mark Begich.
Yeah. Only one Republican.
The only Republican, Mitch McConnell. Yeah,
and that's the striking thing. And Mitch McConnell increasingly looks like, I mean, he's in a real fight, but I think the smart money right now says that McConnell holds that seat. So, it's always been the case. The Democrats had a lot more seats, a lot more of these seats that were vulnerable. And this is why people think Republicans have a chance of taking back the Senate. But, on that list, Pryor, Landrieu, Hagan, Begich, those are all tough races.
Yeah, and Gideon, what's so strange about this is so we're living in two alternate realities. So on this show and on every other show, I think over the past month, we've been talking about chaos across the world that could come to our doorstep. Yet you go out in every one of those races over the past month. Nobody was talking about Gaza. Nobody was talking about what's going on with the ISIS. You heard Kim from Beirut say, everybody's kind of glad the United. I mean, it's surreal that a decade ago, everybody said, get out of our business. And now it seems like a lot of people are thinking America's sleepwalking through history.
How do you think that this is going to play out in America's foreign policy if the Democrats do get weakened in the Senate race? Is it going to change anything?
I don't know. Right now the Republicans are having a battle between themselves to try to figure out whether they're going the way of Rand Paul or the way of Dick Cheney. David Ignatius, I don't know that either party is going to have much of a choice as the entire fabric of the Middle East unravels before our very eyes over the next year. And we can have people on TV saying, well, these lines weren't real. They were drawn by Winston Churchill in 1918. Doesn't really matter. It's international chaos. And I love this line. The Wall Street Journal basically said, chaos is coming to our doorstep, whether we like it or not. I always accuse the Europeans of taking a break from history after 1991, thinking that was the end of history. It's not.
Joe,
we're still here, and it's getting worse by the day.
I think the U.S. is riding the tiger right now. We'll have partisan recriminations about who's to blame, but I think in terms of policy, the responses are going to be pretty much the same, Republican and Democratic.
I also can't see this winding down anytime soon. I mean, if we look at the situation that George Bush faced a decade ago, now is infinitely more complex and infinitely more unstable, because at least Bush was dealing with dictators who ran countries that had structures. ISIS is more like a poison gas. It just kind of floats throughout the Middle East and destroys everything in its path. And as the Wall Street Journal said, the problem is going to come knocking, and the question is just how much can the U.S. sit back and wait until the problem comes knocking at its door, or does it have the guts to go out there and do something? And if so, what can it do?
What can it do?
But here's the question I have for you, which expands on what Gideon asked about the Senate thing in a broader context, is we've now seen 2 successive presidencies, a Republican president and a Democratic president, haunted by Iraq and by the region in general.
Right.
And both, the Bush presidency, by the end, kind of almost destroyed by Iraq.
Right.
Barack Obama capitalized on it, now is plagued by it. So in the broader arc, in Democrats and Republicans, is there some chance, what chance do you think there is that we enter an actual isolationist moment in America where there's clearly a rise of it?
We just don't have that choice. Right. We really don't have that choice.
I just mean in the terms of the electorate.
Listen, I'll be honest with you. Barack Obama is going to be remembered. George W. Bush is going to be remembered for a president who engaged in military adventurism, and that's going to be the mark against him. And Barack Obama is going to be that general that was always fighting the last war. He's overcompensated. He retreated. He has been on, like for instance, he's worried about what's going on in Iraq right now for good reason. You've got 100, 150,000, 175,000 people dead in Syria. And it's not like we weren't talking about that number when it was 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. We said, what's it going to have to get to? 50,000. It got to 100,000. He was still sitting back. Why? The specter of George W. Bush. And Dick Cheney getting caught in the Middle East. He's overcorrected. And I think at this point, as Peter Baker writes in the New York Times, as the Wall Street Journal writes in their main editorial, this president just figured out, finally, he's got no choice.
The reluctant warrior was, I think, the phrase in the Journal.
Yeah, a reluctant warrior, and yeah.
But it's easy to say he overcorrected, but show me what he could have done even if he had started acting earlier. As I said, this situation is just sort of an endless problem, and if he'd gotten involved in Syria, and if he continued to try to fix Iraq, I mean, it's hard to say that he shouldn't have done those things, but I would be skeptical that we would be in a better situation.
The history books can debate that, whether there were actually allies that we could have worked with 6 months ago or a year ago in Iraq. In Syria, there obviously isn't now. Thinks is the Tea Party dead?
No.
Lamar Alexander wins last night. The Haley Barbour side's like 8-0. You look back at the beginning of this campaign year, and we heard that John Cornyn was going to lose, Lamar Alexander was going to lose. They've struck out in every single race.
They've lost almost all the big races. They had inferior candidates. You know what? The voters are pretty discerning. You get a Marco Rubio type Tea Party candidate, they decide to elect him. You get a McDaniel in Mississippi, they almost elect him. But I would say that my message would be the opposite. Respected Republican incumbents who have never been challenged ever in a primary, have been elected 3, 4, 5 times statewide in their states, are suddenly losing 40% of the vote to challengers. Pat Roberts, Lamar Alexander, 49% of the vote in the case of Thad Cochran. I think that shows that there's a lot of unhappiness with Republican leadership among Republican voters at the grassroots. There's a lot of unhappiness with Washington among voters of both parties at the grassroots. And if Republicans want to do well in 2014, but especially 2016, I think saying, hey, no problem. If there's grassroots, forget about them. We're the party of Dole, McCain, Bush, Pat Roberts, Lamar Alexander, Thad Cochran. That is not the way to go.
You're saying that's not going to give.
That is not going to win. That is not going to win in 2016. So I think a healthy dose of intelligent Tea Party activism remains the way to go.
I'll just say to Bill's point, the one thing reinforces is this thing. So someone sent me while we were talking about it earlier this morning that shows that the anti-Lamar Alexander vote was actually a majority of the vote. He luckily had 6 challengers in that race, and if he had faced maybe 1, he might have been in more trouble. But I do think the question the question I have for Bill, well, I know we want to go someplace else, but is whether the Tea Party is ever a real thing or not to begin with. I mean, it seems to me now, as we move forward, there's always been a populist part of the Republican Party in the grassroots, and the Tea Party phenomenon was kind of, when we look back on it, will have been seen as overblown.
Was it whipped up by the national media, and then you had Tea Party leaders saying, yes, we've done this, when this is just part of, I mean, this happened in the '64 convention. This happened in '66.
But I wouldn't say, if you had said back in 2008 that Marco Rubio is going to beat Charlie Crest and that Ted Cruz is going to beat David Dewhurst, people would have said, really? I don't think that's not our father's. That's not our father's Republican Party, grandfather's Republican Party. And I think so. Parts of it were whipped up, but the populist sentiment is very strong. The Republican Party will in September in the House pass legislation removing the bailout for insurance companies from Obamacare. They're going to go in a populist direction. I think most of them want to get rid of the Export-Import Bank. These are smallish things, medium-sized things, but they're symbolic. It will be interesting to have the Republicans be against the Export-Import Bank, half of whose money goes to Boeing, and the Democrats and Obama defending it. Obama said when he was campaigning in 2008, this is just corporate welfare, which he was right about. Now it's the Democratic Party defending corporate welfare, and the Republicans, I hope, actually going after it.
Christina, I'll ask you the same question. What's the state of the Tea Party right now?
You have to look at how they've really shifted what's happening in Congress. I mean, this last debate before they got out of town is an excellent example. You had some very conservative members of the House Republican Conference really shifting an entire debate that had been sort of benefiting the president and the Democrats, and saying to the Senate Democrats, hey, by the way, we're going to take you out too. And so in addition to that, you're seeing this generational shift. All the names you're talking about, in addition to being a representative of a different kind of Republican, they're also older Republicans. And so these Tea Party activists are feeling energized by what they're seeing. You know, like Bill was just saying, it's forcing some of these members to really have to take on some of the messaging from that Tea Party side. And the Republicans are in a good position.
It's an absolute mess. So if you look at both parties, not just the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party, you guys, I'm sure you all saw the CBS poll from earlier this week that most Americans think Congress just absolutely stinks. Only 29% have a favorable impression of the Republicans, 62% unfavorable. Views of the Democrats, 41% unfavorable, 50% view of Congress, 15%. By the way, those numbers, the Democrats are much higher than the Republicans are, but they're both with just 1 point off in the CBS New York Times poll, their all-time lows. And then you look, and I've got to talk about our Republican Party. You look at the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll this week, Barack Obama at his all-time low at 40%, the Republican Party at 19%. Now, the establishment's blaming the Tea Party Party's blaming the establishment. We're in a mess. 19%.
I think politically, analytically, here's where we are. Barack Obama is unpopular. I think that means Republicans do well in November 2014.
Despite themselves?
Despite themselves.
The 19%.
But if they take the message from that all is well with the Republican Party, they're crazy. The Republican brand is very much damaged.
Why is
and they need to nominate, and someone needs to run it. That's why you need to be a reform Republican. You need to be a populist. You need to be an agent of change. All that stuff.
Why is the Republican Party? Who do you blame for that 19% number from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, NBC Wall Street Journal poll?
Look, you have a two-term president that fairly or unfairly leaves office with, what, 35%, or was it even that?
No, I think
approval rating, 29% or something like that.
Yeah.
Who's a Republican president. The greatest financial crisis of our time happens on his watch. You then have a lot of internal Republican fighting on the Hill, which people see, and whichever side you're on, you get disgruntled. If you're a sort of establishment moderate, you say these lunatics are taking over the Republican Party. If you're a populist grassroots guy, you say, hey, we won a majority in 2010. How come they're thwarting our hopes? Then you have Mitt Romney in 2012, with all due respect to him, not exactly a fresh new Republican face embodying grassroots sentiments or reform or change. You add it all up, I think you got it's done a lot of damage.
And Gene
I think it can be fixed pretty quickly because a presidential candidate can change the image of a party, as Bill Clinton showed. If we had been sitting here in 1990, we would have said, oh my God, Mondale, Dukakis, who were the Democratic leaders that
I'll tell you, even 1991, we were talking about the seven dwarfs. Gene, though, I think the bigger problem for the Republican Party, I remember Paul Gigot writing this way back in 1996, 1997, saying if Mr. Gingrich doesn't want crazy people like me going after him all the time, keep them busy with an agenda. Keep them busy with new ideas. Keep them busy, fighting for something bigger than themselves. What does the House GOP stand for?
Well,
what message do they take out there? I mean, they're as vapid as Harry Reid in the Senate.
Yeah, there seems to be no there, Joe. There's nothing that they particularly want to do except pass useless bills that go nowhere, repealing Obamacare. Just a couple of points that to Bill's analysis of why the Republicans are kind of in the tank. Number one of the reasons that you didn't mention, Bill, that Bush was so unpopular was the war in Iraq, and that had a substantial impact on his unpopularity, and we should just note that as we perhaps go back into Iraq. And the second thing is that, this question of whether the Republican Party, it's got to stand for something, but it's also got to get broader. It's got to, because the country is getting broader, and it's got to speak to different kinds of people that it doesn't speak to now. And if it doesn't, then I think the Republican Party continues to sink, long term. It really does. It's got to speak to Latinos and African Americans and people who are not Southern whites, which is that's what it's becoming.
Okay, Bill, follow me. 15 seconds, go.
The quality of Republican candidates is very high this time, though, and it will. If you elect Ben Sass in Nebraska, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Langford in Oklahoma, Sullivan in Alaska, they're younger. They're not career. They're not career politicians. Yeah. I think it really changes the look. It's adds to Rubio, Lee, Cruz, Kelly, Ayotte. You could look at the Republican Party in mid-2015 and think it's much better.
So you don't follow directly.
That was 14 seconds. I was watching the clock up there. I was watching the clock up there.
Maybe. Weekly Standard Time. All right.